Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into one of the most, well, fascinating shifts happening in music right now, Abel Tesfaye.
Hmm.
You know him, of course, as The Weeknd, this huge, kind of mysterious global icon for years. But lately, he's been hinting, and recent interviews show him being incredibly open, talking about maybe stepping away from that famous name.
That's right. And to really get a handle on this pivotal moment for him, we've dug into quite a few recent sources.
Okay.
We're talking interviews with NPR, The Fader, People, The Guardian, plus some, video clips from Complex and Billboard, especially where they talk about his new album and film, Hurry Up Tomorrow.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive is basically to understand the Weeknd's whole journey.
Yeah.
From that early shadowy figure to the more vulnerable artist we're seeing now.
Yeah.
We want to unpack his thoughts on fame, on reinventing himself, what these sources tell us about, like his emotional state, his creative process.
And honestly, how his openness gives us some great examples of natural English expression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is sort of your shortcut to being really informed on where Abel Tesfaye seems to be headed next. Okay, let's jump right in.
Okay, let's start back at the beginning. The sources, they pretty consistently describe The Weeknd's early days as like a backroom enigma.
Right.
His 2011 debut mixtape, House of Balloons, well, one source actually called it intoxicating music for the intoxicated,
Wow.
created by this unreliable and perhaps unscrupulous narrator, basically coaxing the listener into zonked-out rendezvous. That definitely paints a picture, doesn't it?
It really does. And what strikes me about that time is the deliberate, the facelessness, the unknowability.
Hmm.
Their sources really highlight how that was pointedly at odds with artists like, say, Drake back then.
Totally different approach.
Yeah, it wasn't just being private. His style involved what one piece called dispassionate chicanery. Like he was playing games, being intentionally cold or manipulative in the music itself.
Exactly. And because that sound and approach were so unique, people were genuinely confused about, what genre he even was. He got mistakenly lumped into the non-category PB R&B. Remember that whole thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. That darker, sort of moodier R&B sound.
But Tesfaye himself, he saw his production way differently. He actually called it very cinematic.
Okay.
And he apparently used R&B almost as misdirection, like a means for a beast of prey to disguise his intentions as sweet nothings.
Huh. So it wasn't just about the vibe, it was strategic.
It seems so. It was a narrative tool.
Mm-hmm.
In those early tracks, appetite, like raw desire, consumption, that was often the real main character.
So it's storytelling right from the start, but using R&B as a kind of Trojan horse.
Precisely. And you can really see the big shift happening around, 2015? With huge songs like Can't Feel My Face.
Yeah, massive hit.
That's pointed to as a clear line of demarcation, or like a turnstile between shadowy puppeteer and emergent pop star. He suddenly went from that underground vibe to swimming through retro-modern disco grooves with his sights on Michael Jackson's Gilded Throne. Big ambition shift.
Huge leap. And the sources seem to connect this directly to changes in the music biz itself, right? Like with streaming taking off, visibility became key to listenership.
Exactly. That totally anonymous character he started with, which was perfect for, early internet discovery.
Right.
It just wasn't really sustainable for the kind of global superstardom he was heading towards.
But he had to adapt.
He had to. He changed tactics, following the fork in the road toward Neverland Ranch, as one piece put it, kind of poetically. He became this edgy manifestation of pop's baser instincts, bringing that darkness, but into the mainstream pop world.
But bringing that vampiric character into the light in the pop music, that came with issues, didn't it? The sources mention the zeitgeist shifting toward a parasocial interpretation of art.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. Parasocial, meaning basically listeners started forming these intense, one-sided relationships with the character, blurring the lines with Abel Tesfaye, the person.
Ah, okay. So they couldn't separate the art from the artist.
Exactly. And that made it harder for Tesfaye to keep playing the character without it feeling, personally draining. He says in the interviews this conflation became taxing.
I can imagine.
He said it actually forced a subtle but noticeable reevaluation in his more recent albums, After Hours, Dawn FM. He started messing with the character more obviously, sometimes even like killing him off in videos.
Right, right. And this all leads up to the big thing that's been floating around, the idea of actually retiring the Weeknd name altogether.
Yeah.
The sources confirm he's basically declared its ending, with this Hurry Up Tomorrow project being the finale. He calls The Weeknd an entity saddled with a lifetime's worth of baggage. Wow, what a phrase.
It really is. It just captures the weight of it all, right?
Yeah.
He says it's a headspace I've got to get into that I just don't have any more desire for.
And his reason for stopping.
His rationale is fascinating. Once you understand who I am too much, then it's time to pivot. Very strategic thinking about his artistic arc.
It really is. He's also been reflecting quite a bit on fame itself. He told someone he always wanted my work to be famous, but he's not sure if he ever wanted to be famous himself.
Mm-hmm.
Says he hasn't mastered being famous and don't plan to, calls the whole thing a weird situation. Which is pretty candid for someone at his level.
It really grounds it, doesn't it? Now, here's where things get really specific. The sources pinpoint this one event that seems to have been a major catalyzing event, like a trigger for this whole shift.
Okay.
It was when he lost his voice mid-song during that big stadium show in LA back in 2022.
Oh, I remember that. It seemed like a physical throat issue at the time.
That's what everyone thought. But Tessay revealed later he realized it wasn't just his throat. He called it a panic attack. He said it was more up here, and he gestures to his head in the clip, than it was here, pointing to his throat.
Wow. So it was mental distress showing up physically.
Exactly. And he links it directly to being massively overworked. He was pushing himself so hard, touring and trying to wrap up the Idol series at the same time.
Intense pressure.
Totally. He said he felt completely defeated afterwards, knew he really needed to sit the F down and figure out my life. He calls it, pretty bluntly, a mental breakdown, and says the new album, Hurry Up Tomorrow, is pretty much about navigating that whole experience.
So that concert wasn't just a canceled show, it was a massive wake-up call. It led him to think, you lost your voice because it's done. You said what you had to say.
Yeah, like a message from himself almost. It really cemented the idea that it was time. He uses that phrase, don't overstay at the party.
Right.
Started asking, when is the right time to leave if not at your peak?
Yeah.
So that incident, that catalyzing event, really pushed this final chapter into focus.
And all this thinking, this breakdown, this decision to pivot, it all comes together in the Hurry Up Tomorrow album and the film that goes with it.
Yeah. Yep. The album's being called his last under the Weeknd name. Sources describe it as maximalist and messy. One called it a fitting send-off for pop music's premier sleaze. Sounds like a final, maybe chaotic embrace of that persona.
It does, and it's presented as autofiction, right? Like fictionalized autobiography.
Exactly. Where this character, this decorated narcissist and self-proclaimed manipulator, finally realizes no vice can soothe his simmering self-loathing. There's this idea of karmic judgment self-imposed by the creator because the anti-hero character actually dies in the album's story.
So the album finishes the character's story, and the film shows the personal crisis behind it.
Precisely. The film's a companion piece, described as a psychological horror drama. And Tesfaye stars as a fictionalized version of himself, dealing with that whole voice loss incident.
You can really see the film influences he talks about. He and the director, Trey Edward Schultz, mentioned people like Terrence Malick.
Right, the use of music and imagery, montage, like in Waves or Tree of Life.
Yeah, and Schultz apparently brought in Bergman's persona.
Yeah, Tesfaye said he'd seen it, but revisiting it was key. Schultz talked about Persona's power in melding character psychology in a just riveting, compelling, at times scary way, offering layers for multiple viewings. And Persona is all about identity blurring and dissolving.
Which fits perfectly if you're making a film about shedding a persona. Makes total sense.
Another huge concept in the film, and this is really personal for Tesfaye, is sleep paralysis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he actually experiences it himself. Describes these very vivid nightmares where you're totally aware of your surroundings, but you can't move, seeing shadowy figures, hearing voices, sweet nothings.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
It really does, and he connects it to lack of sleep, pointing out the irony is it's gotta all be dark and scary for you to sleep through the night. In the film, sleep paralysis actually becomes the enemy, the antagonist. It's a really potent metaphor for feeling trapped or internally tormented.
So the film's not just telling a straight story. It's using these psychological states and film techniques to show his inner world.
Exactly. And making the film sounds like it was incredibly cathartic for him, especially going back to that voice loss moment. He said he felt he was in a great space to just perform, mainly because he really trusted the team.
You mentioned Barry Keoghan's, right. So they were already like brothers.
Yeah, a longtime friend. And praised Jenna Ortega for being so patient and giving incredible notes. He emphasized how important it is to work with people who genuinely want to work with you, saying they protect you.
For someone who felt kind of exposed by fame, that protection must have been huge.
Seems like it. He said watching the first cut was very cathartic for me in many ways, like processing the breakdown visually.
And he clearly sees this film as the absolute end of the entire Weekend project. He
Yeah.
feels
Right.
grateful that I get to film my persona on 35 millimeters and light it on fire.
That's such a powerful image, isn't it? He sees the Weekend persona as having felt like a 15-year film. And with this movie, he got to finally say, cut, and that's a wrap. A very deliberate cinematic ending.
This whole recent period of openness, it really lets us dig into the deeper emotional stuff he's working through. Contrasting that early nihilistic Weekend
Yeah.
with the more soulful Tesfaye we hear now.
Yeah, he admits that while the early music was designed to provoke in any way, even using drugs to fight nerves or deal with fear of oncoming failure, there was this awkward realization, great phrase, that you've got to be high to experience this, like recognizing the audience expectation he'd set up.
But then things shifted. Albums like My Dear Melancholy let him focus on the heartbreak side, the vulnerable side. And he found it rewarding personally, realizing he could do stuff that's personal and still succeeding.
Right. And the lyrics on this new album sound incredibly raw. He actually quoted a line from the song Enjoy the Show. Traumas in my life, I've been hesitant to heal them, take another hit, or my music, they won't feel it.
Wow.
He said it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, like acknowledging this is what you guys love me for. But beneath that is the realization that it can't just be debauchery.
He's seeing that feedback loop between his pain, his art, and the audience reaction, even if he frames it with dark humor.
And he's also been surprisingly blunt about past projects he wasn't happy with, like calling The Idol half-baked, blames too many cooks in the kitchen, says they went against their instincts.
He said he paid my dues as an actor through that and learned ignoring your gut feeling is blasphemous.
Yeah.
Again, really strong, natural language expressing that regret.
Totally. And the sources are just full of these kinds of emotional phrases. We heard The Weeknd being saddled with a lifetime's worth of baggage, or him feeling creatively fulfilled by it, but also that the persona is mastered. It signals he's done with it, ready to move on.
And the descriptions of the internal struggle are so vivid. The persona having simmering self-loathing, or his resolve has faded as a quicksand of conscience overtakes him, or him talking about men putting up a force field and running from vulnerability, really paints a picture.
Even the symbolism he discusses for the film, like the character's seams are coming apart, meaning abandonment. It just shows how deeply his personal history is baked into the art.
And maybe the rawest example is that lyric he shared from the song Hurry Up Tomorrow. I've been trying to fill that void that my father left, so no one else abandons me. I'm sorry.
Oof. That's incredibly direct.
Yeah. He called the absence of his father so hard to articulate, but feels he managed to eloquently say it in that song. It connects so many dots, linking that personal history to maybe some of the darker themes, the fear of abandonment in his work.
And it ties into his realization that for a long time, success became something to fill a void. Like, my purpose is to just succeed. But now he's seeing what really matters is different.
Things like time with people you love and sleep, we take it for granted.
Right. Even sleep becomes profound. He says with this sort of sighing romantic tone, sleep is such a sweet thing, isn't it? It just shows this shift in values from external validation to maybe internal peace and connection.
Absolutely. And this whole shift toward honesty, it's not just artistically interesting. It's fantastic if you're trying to understand how English is actually spoken naturally.
Totally. You hear him use really casual reactions like, that's the first thing that pops in my head, or describing music like a cry playlist, or just the simple appreciative, ooh, I like this.
Yeah, just everyday stuff. And then more descriptive bits like ambient fucked up noises, or calling Persona a super influential movie, or expressing discomfort, like saying something feels like you're encroaching on somebody's privacy.
And the way he gives criticism, like calling something kind of sucked, like she was very annoying, very wishy-washy, or using that common phrase, too many cooks, for a messy collaboration. It's how people really talk about complex opinions informally.
It's that mix, raw emotion, descriptive language, everyday idioms that makes these recent interviews so useful for seeing how people genuinely express complex personal things in English.
So the big question, what's next after The Weeknd is officially done? He's very clear in the sources. He is not planning to quit music.
Okay, that's good news for a lot of people, I'm sure. His reason seems to be that everything needs to feel like a challenge, and he feels the Weeknd persona is now mastered.
Right. He says he's creatively fulfilled by that whole project, but there's something that isn't fulfilled for me, And the only way you can go there is if you close a chapter somewhere else.
Makes sense. So what's that unfulfilled part?
He wants to tap into a different part of my life, my heritage. He points out he's actually never been to Ethiopia. He says, I can't imagine what going back to Africa is going to do for me spiritually, emotionally, creatively. There's this real pull to reconnect with everything about yourself.
That's a really powerful personal direction to move in. He even touches on possibly reconnecting with his father, just saying, I hope so.
Yeah, and he acknowledges that while his mom and stepfather were vital, having a father figure is important during those really early years, the learning age of 3 to 7, because that stuff stays with you forever. It loops right back to that lyric about the void.
It really shows how deep those early experiences run. He does mention, though, that this retirement isn't some perfectly time-calculated vision just yet. He's still finishing the tour.
Right, it's a process. But he says it's getting there. And ultimately, he believes the key to my longevity is to continue dreaming.
And that feels like a good place to wrap up this deep dive. We've really traced Abel Tesfay's incredible journey, haven't we? From that mysterious backroom enigma to this global superstar who's now confronting vulnerability, artistic baggage, and getting ready for a totally new phase.
Yeah, and looking closely at the words artists use, the stories they tell in interviews, in their work, it offers such amazing insights. Not just about the music, but about their whole creative process, their personal struggles, even philosophical shifts.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you some genuinely interesting nuggets of knowledge, maybe a few aha moments. It's really your shortcut to being well-informed about this huge transition for Abel Tesfaye, whether you're curious or want to talk about it.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Abel Tesfaye talks about the Weeknd project being creatively fulfilled, hitting its peak, but needing to close that door to chase what's unfulfilled. It kind of makes you think, doesn't it? What does it mean for any of us to pursue fulfillment beyond mastering something we're already successful at? And what might we have to let go of, even something we're good at, to explore those new, maybe scary, unfulfilled parts of ourselves?